My wife and I actually were really thrilled to be able to go to the national conference. It's called the RSOL conference. It's Reform Sex Offender Laws. We both got to go. Last year I got to go. Brenda and a few of the rest of us got to go last year to the one in St. Louis. I think the one in St. Louis was probably larger than this one. However, what? This one was bigger? Oh, it appeared so much smaller for some reason. I'm not sure why. But anyway, I learned a lot last year, which is what really got me interested in working with FAIR. I learned a lot more this year, although I was working most of the time because they were understaffed out there. The New Mexico RSOL chapter was, I guess, a little overwhelmed at the amount of work it takes to put this conference on. So fortunately, the Maryland FAIR group got there a day early, and we helped them set the thing up, and we feel good about that. We had some excellent speakers this year, some very colorful speakers this year. One guy was very fond of the F word, a very distinguished attorney from Connecticut who spoke his mind and let us know how he knows that all of the laws that are on the books nationwide, they're all unconstitutional, but they're there. And I'm not sure how our country has gotten to where it's gotten to the point that judges' word, it doesn't matter what a judge decides anymore, as you all know. A judge can sentence you to whatever he wants, but a year later, your local legislators in Annapolis or whatever other state can decide that judge didn't have a clue what he was talking about, and we're going to double your sentence, or we're going to make it for life now, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. Doesn't matter what the judge sentenced you to. It doesn't matter what the plea bargain was. Plea bargains are out the window. It's like, doesn't matter. Just because you agreed to this particular sentence, it doesn't matter anymore, because the local legislature in each state can say, forget all that. We're going to change the rules now. And whatever happened to, truth in sentencing, or, it bothers me. It bothers everybody. Well, we got to hear the real statistics about what the recidivism, is that it? Recidivism, okay. I should be able to say that word pretty easily. And the lawmakers that are in Annapolis and that are in other state capitals keep spewing out these figures for which they have no research. They just make them up. They just absolutely make up numbers that all sex offenders are going to reoffend. 90 to 95% is the figure that they all like to banner about, and they say these words, and people, because that's my congressman, he must know what he's talking about. They don't have a clue. They just made it up. When you ask them, where'd you come up with that figure at? Well, we've read research. Well, what research? Can you give me a piece of research that I can look at? And these attorneys have done that. They've asked their legislators, where'd you come up with these figures at? And, well, we've read research. Nobody knows. And it's all made up. It's all made up figures. The real research that's being done, or that has been done, is quite the opposite. It's not 90 to 95%. In the seminar, not the seminars, but the breakout sessions that I attended, one of them was excellent, done by a college professor at the University of Miami. What was her name already? Lave, yes. Okay. She's actually publishing a research, I guess, manual, book, whatever, on all the research that she's done. But her research indicates the actual figure of recidivism for sex offenders is actually closer to 2.5% to 3%. Not 90 to 95%. There's a big difference here. We're not talking 5 percentage points. Okay. So why do the legislators do this? Why do they constantly talk about these horrible numbers that everybody's going to go out and rape babies again? Well, the reason is because they think it's good for votes. And that's all there is to it. Everything is about votes. You got to use scare tactics, and that's what they talked about also, scare tactics. Everything is to get reelected. Once they're in, they never want to get out. They figure if they show, well, there's one guy here in Maryland, he's down on the Eastern Shore, down in Pocomoke City area, and he never mentioned anything about sex offenders or anything else when he was running for office. He got voted in because he's a nice guy. And as soon as he got into Annapolis, all he talks about now is toughening all the sex offender laws, that we're too weak, we're too this, we're too that. I'm going to have a long talk with this guy because my company actually helped put him in office, and we're going to have a long talk. The congressman is, or Delegate McDermott, yes. Yes.
Good luck.
Yeah.
He's the one who was speaking out in Annapolis. So.
Yes. It's McDermott. Actually, I was at the, because this is kind of strange, but I'm extremely active in the GOP down on the Eastern Shore, and my sign company puts up all the signs all over the Eastern Shore for them at no charge. So we've contributed over $5,000 in labor so far this year, building their headquarters, putting all the signs up for them, whatever. And the GOP has asked me to sit on their board. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm on the list. And, well, we know you are, but you do a lot for the party and whatever. One of the things that I found, and this has nothing to do with this, although we did bring it up at some of the breakout sessions I was at, you got to stay active. You can't crawl under a rock. If your offense, you've done your time, you've done, you know, the parole, the probation, whatever. You've done everything that the law asks you to do, and you're a law-abiding citizen now. You made one mistake in your life. It doesn't mean you have to live the rest of your life under a rock. I know I never did anything wrong, so I went back into my community and I continued to work in my community. And my offense was in 2004. In 2007, Wycomico County gave me their Man of the Year award, and I'm on the list. In 2011, they gave me at a huge banquet a huge plaque for Volunteer of the Year award. And in 2012, they gave me their Man of the Year award this past April again. I'm the first person in the county to ever win that award twice, okay? And I'm on the list. And I told the county council and everybody that voted on the thing, are you sure you want to do this? Because it might look bad for the county. No, you do more for the county than anybody else, and whatever. If you stay active in your community, people either are going to think, maybe he really didn't do anything wrong, or he's really a decent guy and he's trying to give back to the community because he made one mistake once in his life. And I think it's really important that you don't crawl under that rock and try to stay low key. You've got to be active. You've got to continue with life as it was before whatever got you in trouble. So anyway, there's a couple of things real fast I want to go over before Dave. I guess you're who's Dave's going to go next. Where is he?
He ran away.
Oh, okay, it's right there. This was a brochure that was given out over at the in New Mexico. It's an organization called SOSN, which is Sex Offender Solutions and Education Network. I should have brought a whole stack of these things back, but there's some interesting. It's basically question and answer. Adam Walsh, son of John Walsh, was killed by A, yet unknown person, a drug dealer, a sex offender, an irate bookie, a mobster, or a gang member? And the answer is yet an unknown person, okay? But if you would listen to the media about it, it's a sex offender that killed him. No. This is interesting. If you slap your daughter's son, if you slap your daughter or son's friend on the butt, because he did something good, how people do that, okay? Then you discuss it with your spouse and agree to jointly talk to a counselor. The counselor will tell you not to worry about it, refer you to a special counselor, report you to the police for arrest and prosecution, provide you with the best therapy they can, or tell you that you're a pedophile and refuse to treat you. And the answer is C. He will report you to the police for arrest and prosecution. If it was a simple pat on the back, pat on the fanny. There were some things in here that just blew me away. Family man was in his front yard playing basketball with his children and some of the other neighbors' teens. During the game, his elbow came in contact with a teenage girl's breast. Okay? You know how that happens when you're playing basketball. You're all over the place. Okay. A, he could be playing an aggressive game of basketball. B, embarrassed. C, ejected from the game. D, convicted of a child sexual molestation. E, all of the above. And the answer is E, all of the above, for something that simple. I met people at the convention that are on the list because they mooned somebody in a college fraternity prank. I mean, I was in a fraternity too. I think everybody's done that sooner or later. Out of the back window of a van, you see friends across the street, you moon them, okay? 2 ladies in a car at the intersection saw it happen. They took down the license plate. The guy's on the sex offender list for life for a college fraternity prank. There was another guy that I met last year at the convention in St. Louis. He left a bar, I think he was in Philly, left a bar in Philadelphia, 2:30 in the morning, walking to his car, and he had to go to the bathroom. He had to take a whiz. He couldn't find an open bar. Nobody would let him in to use a restroom. He went in a dark alley between 2 buildings. Nobody was around. He started to pee on the wall. A female cop was walking by, heard a noise up the alley, shined her flashlight up the alley. He's on the sex offender list for life for peeing in an alley at 2:30 in the morning, okay? How crazy are the laws, okay? How crazy are the laws? Yeah, there's some bad guys out there, okay? I'm sure there's some bad women out there. I want to meet them. No, I'm just kidding. But there's some really bad guys out there. But the vast majority of people that I've seen that are on the list made one simple mistake, okay? Something really, really stupid. They'd never do it again. And of all of the offenders that are out there, whether it's murders or burglars or drug dealers, sex offenders, who's the least likely to reoffend? Research shows sex offenders are the least likely to reoffend of all the major crimes. But that's not what your legislatures will have you believe. And they are pushing for tougher and tougher and tougher stuff because they still believe in that 90 to 95%. And it's wrong. So anyway, I didn't really talk a whole lot about the convention, but I'm sure you'll have more details. I was too busy doing sound the whole time.
Thanks, Gary.
Gary's a PR man, isn't he? And if he can stay out of jail, that's awesome. My name's David Smith. I also went to the meeting, and I wanted to focus on just a few highlights, but mostly the purpose of this meeting, the objective, was to develop model reforms to sex offender laws nationwide. Some states have made more progress than others. Nobody's made a lot of progress. So I wanted to go over that in particular. Before that, a couple of points, highlights to me. Several states, and before the national meeting consisted of state affiliates like FAIR. Right behind me here on the wall, this is the Colorado Advocates for Change. If you want to know repeat rates, this is 24 studies. Right here, by state. Come look at this on Breaker after the meeting, if you're not convinced, to go with what Gary said. So these state organizations come together, and we heard some good stuff. North Carolina and Pennsylvania in particular have developed parent support groups. FAIR does a lot of family support that can be kids and spouses. I think those states have taken it to a new level. And just to be crass, I mean, parents really, really care. They have resources that many registrants do not. Usually they're freer of stigma, although they're part of the registrant family. So they're not free either. But the parent support group was an incredible function. I want to bring that home. California, when they visit their legislature, they said last year, they've begun to take 3-person teams. A family member, a registrant, and a professional. A professional meaning Brenda, for example, is a representative of FAIR, a psychologist. There are people out there who are neither registrants or family of registrants who care. And they found that approach, taking those 3 people, depending on who they visited and what the issue was, one or the other would start the conversation. So I want to put in a call to all of you folks in the room that next January, February, March, and April, think about being on one of those teams. And try to come up with a reason not to. And I'll challenge you on that. Okay, coalition building. Oh, one other point before getting to the reforms. It seems that almost every state in passing a series of sex offender reform laws, and there are amendments almost every year. They almost all, I think all but one I can think of, have gone beyond AWA Adam Walsh Act requirements. For example, Alabama now has a requirement when you leave the state you have to have a travel permit. Isn't that nice? And you've heard about the residency requirements in lots of states. Those have been struck down, by the way, in many states, but they haven't everywhere. And some states and municipalities are still trying to pass those. So to date, Maryland, the legislature has not been keen on that, largely, well, I don't know why, but a lot of advocacy work in the last 3 years through FAIR. So it's a mixed landscape out there. States are handling it differently. And now I want to move, if I might, to talk about some model reforms. To begin talking about reform, there's some principles that whoever you talk to, or we need to remind ourselves of. Number one, current laws don't meet public safety expectations. People think they're protecting the public. Data argue otherwise. Actually, data argue it makes things worse. For many states, there are unfunded mandates. They're not cheap. Several states have chosen not to be compliant with sex offender registry laws because the penalty in Justice Department grants is less than what they spend on the program. It's a net loser.
16 states are compliant with SARA.
Only 16. So the majority of states, and even though some are technically, Maryland was declared technically, but Maryland actually isn't in a couple of areas, particularly dealing with juveniles. Third point, penalties in most states are so harsh that they actually suppress reporting, are obstacles to treatment, and have adverse effects on victims and future victims. And you may well know your own story about that, where if this is going to break my family apart and the victim's going to be homeless, I mean, there are some horror stories you know about. So we've set up a system that's counterproductive. It's not protecting the people it's intended to, and so on and so forth. And it's unconstitutional. That's a small point. Now, on the reform, the discussion that happened at the conference, panelists included basically psychologists, psychiatrists, the treatment community that talked about risk assessment and evaluation, and on this hand, attorneys that talked about the constitutionality and how to approach laws, approach reform either through the courts or through legislation, two different arms. And with the goal of reform is to begin removing some people from registries. That's the goal. In most states, most registrants are on for life, and the list is getting bigger and bigger, and as you know, it doesn't tell you anything about risk or anything else. Two big approaches. The treatment community talks about individual risk assessment. And I don't know what experience you've had, but in the end, no matter what test is applied to an individual, the counselor can't guarantee there will or will not be a reoffense because it's an individual measure. You can be higher risk or lower risk, but what those tests are based on is performance of groups. So the second way of thinking is to model reform after characteristics of groups of people. For example, it seems like sex offenders reoffend about 3.5% of the time. You know what DUI offenders repeat? I think it's 80. Do you want to know about drug users? I mean, so that's what I mean by a statistical group. And that, actually, for many people, is a better way to inform public policy because, you know, I could get an assessment from a psychologist and I freak out the next day and who knows what. So those are the two approaches, whether it's individual risk assessment, and a prerequisite is that the current system of tiering in Maryland and every state isn't based on risk at all. It's a huge misconception. It's just based on your offense. It's not whether you've had one or several, or it's, so there's no risk assessment. Now, if I could you pass some of these out? I put together, would you mind passing some out, please? You just pass one to each person.
Pass around.
And some of the sessions came out with conversations about, well, what would a reform look like? And I've tried to capture on this piece of paper, and I'll go over it with you, what some of the forms that were discussed look like. To start this, whatever you think about registries, it's not realistic to think about having them eliminated in the near future. That is not going to happen in the near future. Even where they're being declared unconstitutional in some states because they're punishment and they can't be applied retroactively, well, if they're applied proactively looking forward, they may be punishment, but they're not retroactive. And the Constitution speaks to retroactive punishment. Now, there are other issues if they are found to be punishment. So it's not going to happen fast. And realistic approaches look at incremental steps over time. Some of the ideas that came up, and I want to emphasize it's not an exhaustive list. There's an unlimited number of permutations and combinations. Looked at factors like risk assessment. I could talk about that more, but with time I won't. Distinguishing between first-time offenders and repeat offenders. Drawing a line between public registries and law enforcement-only registries, which actually is a big issue. And some states maintain separate registries for that. And
West Virginia is one of them.
that does.
Separate registries. Only ones on the public registry are predators and repeat offenders. Everyone else is on a law enforcement registry.
And every state, and Maryland has juveniles are, well, I won't go into that because I'll get it wrong. Most every state has some list that's not public, but in this day and time, tell me exactly what's not public. What you can't, no, I'm just, what you can't get to, what public can't find out electronically, what is really private these days, and it's getting less so. So go to some of these ideas, and I numbered them just for discussion. If you let me run through these 7 or 8, and if there's time for questions, and our MC will decide. The first one was that after completing all elements of your sentence, and that would be everything, parole, probation, everything, being removed from the registry. Of course, you could be removed from a public registry, remain on a law enforcement registry. There are different combinations there. That one basically is based on the idea that registries as they exist are punishment. Punishment is the sentence you get the day you're sentenced. When that sentence has been fully executed, then why are you having more and more for the rest of your life? That's basically a life sentence for a lot of people. So that's the rationale. Number 2, this is a phased concept. After 10 years with no reoffense, registrants would come off a public registry. After another 10 years with no reoffense, come off of all registries. Again, that's just another way to step it down over time, giving a chance for a person to mess up again. And if they don't, reward them for that. As someone said, when you're on a list for life, what's your incentive to stay clean? Number 3 is just a small variation on number 2. Number 4 is one that wasn't discussed a lot, but I haven't met a person yet who believes the tier system we have is effective at anything. So another totally different approach is, first offense, you're on for 10 years. Second offense, 20. Third years, you're on for life. Where's the science behind it? Who knows? But at least you can see some rationale to it. Anybody could see some rationale. So something like that. Welcome, sir. Number 5, using personal risk assessment tests, and there are a number of them out there, downgrade individuals who test out on lower risks to at least a law enforcement only list, and eventually to come off that. And again, this number 5 relies more on personal risk assessment. And any of you that have been down that road know there are lots and lots and lots of problems there. And risk assessment also deals with treatment, which is another issue. I would repeat, one of the psychologists at the conference who practices in Texas, he says, and he makes a living off of delivering sex offender treatment. That's how he makes a living. And he says his personal view is that for about 98% of people, they have all the sex offender training they need on the day of conviction. And if they didn't get it that day, it's a problem. He goes on to say, and I'm not a psychologist, and many of his peers don't agree with him, particularly people in that field making a living. There are real differences on professional beliefs in sex offender treatment programs and how effective they are or aren't. But more on that later. But not for me today. The seventh approach deals with, and this is, we tried it in Maryland, an incremental approach. It looks first at removing the most obvious miscarriages of justice, like Romeo and Juliet cases. A couple having consensual sex when they're 17 and one of them turns 18. Now it's 18 and 17 or 16. And our legislature, actually Department of Public Safety, tried to get that through last year to fix that a bit.
We do have that wider range of ages, though. It's not 18 to 17 in Maryland.
Was it 4-year?
It's a 4-year,
Okay.
and then there's this other gray area with 14 and 15-year-olds. But yeah, we did try to get one passed, and I'll talk about that more.
And again, looking nationally with lots of different laws in lots of different states, it's quite possible when one person of a consenting couple turns 18, they just violated the law that day, if they continue what they've been doing with their partner. And so that's a real concern everywhere. And then moving on down that incremental approach to first removing those people. Did kidnapping come off in Maryland last year? Kidnappers were supposed to register on the list whether their kidnapping victim was a kid or an adult, whether or not there was any sexual offense. So that did come off the list. Why was it there? So that's the, why not? So that's just a range, and none of these options are perfect. Some of them would be viewed as radical by legislatures. Some of them would be very rational to other people. Any one of them is going to take a lot of effort. Any one of them in any state is going to take funding. We heard loud and clear from other states. Several other state affiliates have retained professional lobbyists. I don't know if anybody in this room has done that for a living. If we're going to affect our legislature, we all are important voices. We're real important as constituents and as family members, but it's not like being in Annapolis 4 or 5 days a week and working in the off season to keep up with what's going on. So that's something, if we're serious, if other states are serious, that is the way you get stuff done. You hire those kinds of people. We'll talk about communications a little later today, I hope. You don't take that for granted. This is a red-hot tinderbox issue. Can you think of one that's more difficult to deal with in public or in private? You need good communications. We're not trying to say sex offenders shouldn't be punished. We think they should serve all the sentence they get, and we think that's all they should serve. So we're going to need funding for communications, funding for legal fights. You'll hear about one of the judicial challenges here in just a minute. And the last thing, I believe there's going to be a white paper coming out of this conference that will elucidate some of these ideas a little bit more. The idea being that state affiliates back home can look at these ideas and get okay, well, maybe this would work. In Ohio, maybe this worked, maybe this, and we can begin to more collectively, nationally, work through our state institutions. Last thing I'll say, maybe, a lot of conversation about challenging the constitutionality of these laws. And the consensus, the strong consensus was that the place to do that now is at the state level. It's happened in Ohio already. Somewhere else?
Vermont, Maine, Illinois, or Indiana. One of those two. One of those I states. Indiana.
And I hope Maryland's on the way. And the idea is that as states challenge their own constitutionality of their own laws, and many of those states were pushed into those laws in 2009 and 7, 8, 9, and 10 because of federal legislation. Once 8 or 10 or 12 states have found this unconstitutional, then might be the time for a federal suit that would go to the Supreme Court. The consensus is also that this particular court, whatever your political view, would not be where you want to go. So the time is not ripe for the U.S. Supreme Court. The time is ripe at the state level for states to bring challenges. And we need to pay a lot of attention to those. If there's time for questions, I can do that, or I'll sit down.
Any questions for David on
Questions?
the convention?
I was going to say, most states model
Wait.
Hold on.
Again, we're trying to record this for folks not here.
most states model their constitutions after the federal constitution. So if it can be seen to be unconstitutional at the state levels, then it can move on to the federal as a collective
That's true.
resolution.
Most states do have that. There shall not be retroactive punishment. Some states have more than that. Maryland has
And
more than that.
Bills of attainder. Right.
Okay.
Any other
I have
questions?
a question. David, you would be a good one to be aware of this, probably as much as anyone in this room, because you do follow the politics so closely.
Can I suggest you stand up so everybody can hear you?
Certainly. Many of us are aware that there's budget issues, not just around sex offender legislation, but around the whole overbloated federal government, that there is this legislation that's already been enacted by the U.S. Congress to slash the federal budget. They had the super committee, which was supposed to come up with a way to do it. They failed. And here at the end of the year, we're supposed to be facing this, this budgetary cliff where there's been mandatory cuts. If these mandatory cuts come, what is your position or feeling about how this is going to be affected? I mean, when you're talking about slashing police forces by 10–15%, it becomes real easy to say, why do we have them in the office registering these sex offenders? We don't even have them on the street.
Okay. I don't know that I'm qualified to have an opinion, but I'm an optimist and a pessimist. What do you want first? The pessimist tells me, we'll do the pessimist first, that if it becomes too expensive to chase down registrants and make house visits, that we'll just charge registrants $200 or $300 a year, so they'll cover their own costs. Some states are doing that. That's one way to approach the shortfall. The other way, and in Albuquerque we heard from a New Mexico senator, McSorley, and he was the one that called this an unfunded mandate. He's a long-term, he's been chair of all the judicial-related committees in New Mexico, and he thinks it's a real budget issue that would probably go more the way you're suggesting, that as times get really tight fiscally and people look to cut, you hope people will look at programs that are more effective and less effective at accomplishing their missions. And an honest look at that would show this one, I believe, to be not very effective at promoting public safety, preventing future offenses. And so in that way, that might be good. But I was involved last year with some others, trying to collect data from Maryland counties. Some of them sent in how much they spend, how many sheriff's deputies, how much time to fingerprint and whatnot. We didn't hear from some of them. It was at that point when we began to hear about this notion, well, we'll just charge registrants for that. And so it's like, I don't know. Yes?
Hang on.
Okay. Shut me off when you're ready.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Lewis, and I know you guys.
Who's our board member? For those of you that don't know
I'm
him.
one of two board members.
Glad to have you here.
Heard a lot of this before, but some of it's new. So my simple question is, if I can remember it now, is there any correlation between the severity of sex offender laws and geography? For example, the South, the West, the whatever. Does RSOL say anything about that?
I've got my own. I got a special mic of my own. short answer, and it's not scientific, is yeah, there's some variation, especially in the South. Things are much, much worse in the South than they are up north or out in the Midwest. So at least that region, avoid it. But you know, as far as the scientific, you know, look at things, the one thing that I can say has been across the board, every state that has an active group, whether it's this size or even a little smaller or a little bigger, like Texas and such, any state that has an active advocacy group has seen the skyrocketing stop. So once people start showing up and advocating, they may not see the laws going back down, but they stop going up because there's people there actually making noise about it. And then the lawmakers go, oh, really? Some people don't like this? And they do listen. So, yeah. So that I can tell you.
And
that's
another
no matter
obvious
what.
point related to that came out from all over the country is it's much easier to enact one of these laws than to de-enact it.
Yes.
Taking it off the books, and you know that's true with everything, to take it off the books is much harder than put it on the books. So the obvious first priority, I'd argue, for our legislative strategy is to prevent any more getting on the book. That's
Yep.
number one.
And that takes all of us showing up.
Everybody.
Showing us
At the hearings.
at hearings.
Right, in Annapolis, which a number of us did, but it's going to take more and more and more because the more people that are sitting on our side and address and take the podium and address the legislators, the more they'll listen up. I think most of them were shocked to see how many people showed up from FAIR to testify at some of
Yeah.
these things this past January and February. And I thank everybody from FAIR that did show up, but I want to see more.
Yep.
Parents and families, families and parents, siblings.
Yes,
And us
indeed.
registrars too.
Thank you very much, David.
Thanks.
Yeah, this was the first year that the conference really stepped up and was a media. We actually sent things out. We put it up on the website. We promoted it. We sent out press releases all across the country. And as usual, everybody's going, oh, there's, you know, crazy people over there. But we, luckily for us, had some negative press as well. And what happened at first was that there's some online sites that are very anti-sex offender and anti-sex offender advocacy that decided to try to discredit RSOL in particular. And they sent stuff first to our speakers, all of our speakers, to discredit us and try to accuse us of being NAMBLA incarnate. For those of you who don't know what NAMBLA is, that's the National Association of Man-Boy Love. You know, yeah, okay. So anyway, in other words, we're out there supporting pedophilia and, you know. So they're out there saying that about our organization, which is, you know, totally false. But they sent this out to all of the speakers, and they tried to say, now, why are you still coming to this conference? And every last one of the speakers said, and just pitched it. They also sent it to our the hotel. So they were trying really hard to discredit us and get the thing canceled. And but we had, fortunately, done some of our own PR. We had talked to the hotel, we talked to all these people, and we'd really gotten the message through what we were really for. And they had nothing to do with that. And so they said, wow, where are they coming from with this? You know, so they stuck by us. Right. So we then, after that round of panic, they sent out another blast, and they sent it to the city of Albuquerque, and that's where it got really interesting. Because the city of Albuquerque looked for, you know, they tried to look for the facts, and they decided we need to cover our butts. There's a whole bunch of sex offenders, and it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of them, and they're all going to show up in Albuquerque, and oh my God, you know, what are we going to do? And so they covered their butts by contacting the hotel and saying, we want to make sure you know that there's a bunch of sex offenders, and they might actually, you know, they support normalizing sex between children and adults, and so you might want to, you know, talk to your general counsel and warn the other people staying at the hotel, and oh yeah, and all the other hotels nearby. You might want to let them know all of this. Our hotel stood firm. We were convinced we were dead in the water as soon as that went out. But they stood firm because we had talked to them. And we did PR back and forth. Again, we contacted the city. We said, we really don't appreciate your approach to this. We feel like this is, you're trying backhandedly to step on our First Amendment rights to free speech. And we actually got a lawyer involved who was willing to do this for free. So, so we actually, got that somewhat neutralized. But the media at that point picked up on it. The media, because the city put out a little press release themselves saying, we're going to have a town hall meeting and assure everybody that they will be safe and we will be there protecting them. So there was a town hall meeting. I see Jeff back there grinning. The town hall meeting had 5 people show up. It was hysterical, absolutely hysterical. 3 of them were people from RSOL. And what made it more interesting, and none of them were speaking, that one of them was there videotaping, actually, and then the other 2 were a woman and her mother, neither of whom wanted to be on camera, but they just wanted to be there, just in case. We were not allowed to speak at this thing. There was no Q&A allowed, because if we got up, we might be, who knows what we might be espousing. But that meant that exactly. But, we had no platform there, because they said this was all settled in 2003 by Smith versus Doe. So, which is the case that decided that registration was not considered punitive. So we were not allowed to speak, but that meant that neither was the public allowed to speak. And so the 2 or 3 people that showed up, all angry about that we were allowing this group of dreadful people to show up, weren't allowed to ask any questions. And they got pissed that they couldn't ask any questions. And then just briefly, I've got to at least mention that the city had a couple of people there, that talked about, it's very important, and a lot of recidivism rates, and blah blah blah, but then the police officer got up, the commander, what was his last name, Rowe, I think. He got up and I wasn't there. I only heard about this from one of the other ladies who went, but he got up and he said, I'm just so humbled by, all the people that work in this force, and we're really going to do our best, and we know this is a very emotional circumstance, and I just love all of you, and I hope you love me too, and this morning, this whole issue, it just made me think about a song. And he'd written a song that morning, and he got his guitar and started playing the song, the electric guitar. It's kind of a jazzy thing. And all the media were like, what? Scratching their heads. It's like, now the media actually didn't get that, because the couple of angry people stormed out before that because they weren't allowed to speak. So they go storming out and the media follows them. So this was not caught on anything other than our cameras. But they went out but at that point, to get back to actual media, at that point, what the media had been promoting or had been presenting was, again, hundreds of sex offenders are showing up for this conference, and they're wanting to make laws. They wanted to make things easier and reduce people's punishments, and and making things easier for sex offenders. And that's okay in a sense, yeah, but no, that's not what we're about. We're not about changing anybody's punishment, right? I mean, if you've been involved in the, but that was, and then there was this element of fear, that to give them justice, they didn't go at it, literally saying there's going to be hundreds of sex offenders here, oh my God, but you kind of got that sense, from their earlier ones. Day 1 of the conference, as I mentioned, I'm executive director, so I got hit day 1 with media coming and asking questions like, so are you scared? Are you worried, about any of this? And I said, no, because, most of us are not even registrants, and most so I hit some facts. And I said, we're not about punishment. We're not about changing punishment. We're about stopping unconstitutional laws. So I was able to start telling them what we're actually about, that the registry isn't supposed to be a punishment. Everybody treats it like one, but the registry is not a part of a person's sentence. In 9 out of 10, more than that, probably 95 out of 100 cases, it's not a part of your sentence, and that's how they're changing it. And we're up there arguing it. So every time I had another interview, this was almost my maiden voyage. I think I'd been on camera one other time prior to this. So every time I got up there, I honed it a little more because I'd see what they took wrong. But by the end of the conference, they were there all that morning and then took a break. Sunday, a couple of channels came back and did a follow-up. And by that time, they weren't going, oh my God, all these sex offenders are here. They were going, there was no crime. Not a single reported incident. I mean, that was what they reported. And they put, they asked a lot of questions of me on the last day, one station in particular that had been really hard to convince what we were really about. And they said, but what about the victims? What do you think about the victims? And I said, for the victims, especially those where something's happened recently, I'm sorry. Because it is difficult. And we must never forget the victims. Because that goes on as well. But we have to talk. We have to talk about this because the policies that we have are failing. And that's the key. And I do believe they got most of that in a soundbite. A lot of other stuff doesn't.